what is the value that stations can offer filmmakers? And what has been your personal experience, good or bad? We really want to hear, this will help anybody who's listening in on what your experiences is. And then what kind of connections do you think, or what can filmmakers offer in terms of connections to stations to help in their communities? And Brad, why don't we go ahead and have you start first?
Sure. I'll rattle through a few things, and then if there's interest later, people can ask. But I've been fortunate to work with public media for over 20 years, and some ways in which partnerships with public media stations have been great is way back in the 90s, I worked with Lumiere Productions on a series called With God on Our Side about the history of the religious right, which South Carolina ETV was our presenting station. I've worked on 3 or 4 ITVS projects, and at least 2 of them began with seed money and support from a local public television station, as Goes Janesville started with Wisconsin Public Television based in Madison. Then I will say that public media has also partnered with us through the World Channel on distribution of one of our films, and Independent Lens, of course, for other films. Then the good and the bad. So I'd say the bad is that when I moved from New York to Wisconsin, I moved to a place that does not have a large presenting and production capacity and focus station. Between Milwaukee and Madison, neither really are. We've worked with Madison, as I mentioned before, but Milwaukee is more focused on internal resources. So even though the management and our company, think about a lot of similar things, we haven't found really an opportunity to work together, just kind of based on mission and resources. But I hope to. I continue to hope to. And the last thing I'll say is just public media includes radio. And we had a wonderful partnership with UWM along with a non-public media commercial Black-owned radio station and our local paper on a 2-year radio series about gun violence. And that was an extraordinary partnership.
That sounds incredible. Thank you, Brad. Malkia, why don't we have you talk next as another filmmaker representative?
Sure. I'm really, really honored to be here today and to be doing this kind of work on Juneteenth. And I also personally just want to acknowledge that I live on captured land. That I'm in the Washington, D.C. area in Prince George's County, Maryland, traditionally the home of the Nacotchtank and Piscataway peoples. So I just want to add that to the conversation. I'm going to start with the vision. And this is one that I know I share with independent media makers in my region, that our local public TV affiliates can become an active, integrated part of our regional creative and media making ecosystem. Simply put, that's the vision. Mm-hmm. And we believe that despite our different pieces of the puzzle, we can come together to create more effectively and more prolifically, regionally nuanced, high quality programming for local audiences. And that in itself is a win. But also we can together boost our region's contribution to what folks in other parts of the country get to see, whether that's through national strands or through other means, that both things can happen. That's the vision. Certainly for independents, the draw to working with an affiliate, there isn't a more highly regarded content brand than public media, especially for documentary. And of course, we want the shine. We want the esteem of being presented on that platform, whether it's conventional or online, and that extends to locally. And no doubt that's just a part of it. And I think connected to that is career sustainability, but I would also add the ability to retain local talent in a region. Those opportunities make a difference. But it's just important to us that there's no other platform that aligns more closely, mission-wise, in terms of our shared mission to reveal, to inspire, to entertain and educate, but with integrity. And there's no other platform where we know we can reach the audiences we care about equally, as well as folks we may not even know who might be interested in our work. But there are also things that we can do for stations. Stations have probably heard filmmakers say, "Oh, I can expand your reach." Yes, but we can also expand capacity. We can help you shine too. So when it comes to building infrastructure to do more of the programming or convening or outreach that you want to do, we got skills. We can help with that. We can partner with stations. And I know I speak for makers in my region. We've been doing a lot of field building and conversations around how we can partner, even around fundraising, around bringing the resources together to make sure that there are, curated strands, for example, that showcase local work on a recurring basis, or other kinds of opportunities. Just a quick word about my particular experiences, how I come to the conversation. I grew up in DC, where I was blessed with 3 local affiliates. I grew up in love with public TV. I remember when Howard University Station launched, the only, I believe, still network station in the network that's owned by a Black institution. I'm sure somebody's HU one thing over here. And I remember as a kid asking, who gets to make up the TV programs? That was, and people said a producer. So I took that term and I was like, I want to get to make TV programs. And it was the local affiliates. I didn't know anything about a national system. The local affiliates were that inspiration and that, source for me. Fast forward to my reality as an adult. I've spent about 18 years as a media professional, not always a producer. And early in my process, I was invited to meetings where a general manager at a station had a convening of local makers. We shared work. I have a mentor out of that process to this day, because of that convening. Archival footage, access to archival footage, especially of Black life. Nobody has that in their collections like local public television stations. So thank you for all those old-fashioned public affairs shows and for, preserving that work and making it available. I've been profiled on a local arts program, but I will just quickly end with on the content partnership side, like actually bringing content to air or be presented on local affiliates platforms, or even to partner with them and taking work to the national level. It's been much, much harder, and I haven't had as much success with that. So I want to kind of represent those filmmakers who are in that place in their process. And it hasn't always been due to a lack of desire by the station. Some things are systemic, some things are economic. And certainly there's education that has to happen on our side about the inner workings and complexities of stations. But I am clear from talking with colleagues, there's room for improvement about communication, transparency, and setting how to recurring clear opportunities to formally pitch and present what we can do to stations and about how commissioning and other things work. And that's something in various markets I've seen a lot of people wish for, even with all the great successes that people have had with partnerships in other instances.
Yeah, there's so many examples to go from, but yeah, that was great and very rich statements, because I'm sure the station people were like me, writing a lot of things down to discuss. So Chloe, I want to direct slightly different to you, because I know you're working with so many emerging producers. I feel like, probably with the groups you're working with the most, they're really seeing the events of COVID, the protests, uprisings, things of that nature. And in the last few months of how they've probably shifted their very reality. It was already a struggle, or they were, engaged in learning on how to navigate the system. And then all of this, the hits keep on coming. There's just more things are evolving and changing. How do you see this affecting, emerging filmmakers, all this, the moment of time that we're in right now?
Absolutely. I do want to respond to your first question a little bit.
Oh, sure. Yeah, sorry.
Our vision at Firelight is completely filmmaker centered, and Malkia spoke to a lot of what I was going to share as well. But I think it's really important to understand that this relationship between stations and filmmakers can be mutually beneficial, and that the sustainability of filmmakers, the success of filmmakers leads to success of institutions, leads to success for the field, and then success for audiences, new audiences that are being brought in. They get to see their filmmakers as hometown heroes and then continuously connect. It's a shot for early career filmmakers to start a body of work. As Malkia said, the potential for career sustainability through working with public television, a platform to connect with community.
It looks like we lost Chloe for a minute. Susie, you're on mute.
I know I couldn't unmute and then I couldn't unmute myself. I'm so sorry we lost Chloe. I think you're back now. Can you unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can. Great.
All right. I'm calling from Jamaica, and so it's Jamaican internet that's happening right now.
Okay, well, you won is in terms of destination, you won, but go ahead.
So just to say that these models aren't new. Stanley started his career in public television. Miles Davis was on public television last year, and he's been doing work for decades. So we can follow that model and keep moving forward with early career filmmakers. In terms of how things have changed for Corona, I started the month literally calling all of our fellows and just checking in to see how they are. And with POC filmmakers, you know, some of their family members are on the front lines, not to say that that doesn't happen with everybody else, but as we can see with the statistics, we are affected more substantially. 70% of New Orleans Black population is gone. And so all of those emotions, all of those experiences are manifesting and not preventing people from getting to work, but there's another hurdle to get over before we can even get to thinking about what does my life as a filmmaker mean? You know, those things are all being juggled at the same time. Also, like many organizations, we found ourselves in the midst of a pandemic, and our programs have to shift. Our flagship program, the Documentary Lab, went virtual. We just did a 4-week retreat with our most our outgoing cohort. And our new initiative, the Groundwork Lab that you mentioned before, Susie, for early career filmmakers of color, working in the South, Midwest, and US territories. The whole point of that program was to meet filmmakers where they're at, and we've completely had to shift that. You know, those are spaces.
Oh, darn. I think
Getting out nationally, and where there needs to be sustainable ecosystems, which is why we founded Groundwork, to create that it's really important to me as someone who lives in New Orleans to see that happening, so that we're not depending all the time on this national network to get our work seen. We have audiences in our backyard.
Chloe, I'm so sorry, you keep on fading in and out.
Which includes a program of 3 to 5 commissioned short docs by early career filmmakers. You'll hear more about that in the coming weeks.
You faded in and out a little bit, Chloe, but I think I mean, I got the gist, but I think that the big thing that maybe we'll have you say a few things, because on my camera right now, you're frozen.
Anyone.
Oh, shoot. Okay, well, I'll move on, but that was really, thank you, Brad and Malkia and Chloe for your comments so far. And let's go ahead and move on to the station folks. So I have Amy Schumacher. Where is Amy? Hi, Amy. Amy Schumacher is the Associate General Manager of Content at WGCU in Southwest Florida. She's also the co-curator of the Real South documentary series, which is a national series distributed throughout the country. And then we have Juan Devis. Juan Devis is the Chief Creative Officer for both KCET and PBS SoCal in Southern California, and also Link TV nationwide. Juan oversees all the production and editorial output, from long-form episodes to short-term digital series, and also is responsible for developing strategic partnerships with funders and organizations and independent production houses. So hi, Juan. Hi, Amy. How are you guys?
Hi.
Hello.
Good to be here. Thanks for including me.
Oh, sure. So those first 3 were great. I mean, immediately as a station person myself, I would love to have further conversations with them. I'm sure you would too. But I wanted you to specifically for the audience, tell us about your work and your approach to local productions, and then what the value you have or you see with the independents that bring to the work bring work to your station. And what are obviously the challenges is too. So Amy, let me have you go ahead and start first.
Sure. So thank you for having me and for everybody watching today. I'm located in Southwest Florida at WGCU, and we really have a focus on local news on our FM station. We're a dual licensee and digital. Most of our local TV production, we're currently focused on short content, and that is so we can use it on digital platforms and air it between PBS programming. But I will let you know that most of our TV content, we do work with freelance producers, and we have had some short films air between shows. Some of the British shows are short, so we may have up to 8 to 10 minutes between programs on some evenings in prime time. So that's just something for public television stations who might be like us and have not sold all their underwriting space. Plus it adds continuity between programs. I mean, our viewers don't want to watch a bunch of promos, so if we can put content in those open spaces, that's an area that I'd encourage filmmakers to think about, speaking with their local stations about. A lot of the challenges we have, I think at every station, is always funding, a big concern on fundraising, and of course, since the pandemic, big concerns that we'll have a decrease in funding in the year ahead. But I want to say I've worked with independents over the years at my other station, SCTV, and I'm getting to know some independent producers in Southwest Florida, and especially looking for connections to some of the communities we don't cover as well as with a small news team. We have indigenous communities, we have migrant farmers, we have a huge agricultural industry and rural part of our state that we don't get to reach out to as much as we'd like. So filmmakers interested in some of the kind of the regions and areas that our small news team isn't able to connect with, I would be very interested in working with folks and thinking about ways we can create content together that really touches all 12 counties that we broadcast to. And that's did you have
Sorry, no, my mute, I'm having trouble with my darn mute button. I'm so sorry. I was in awe of what you were saying, Amy.
Oh.
Actually, it was. No, I think though that regional diversity is definitely something that, touching on what Malkia said too, is that's really a great entree, but also a necessary thing for stations to really amplify is the regional voice locally. I mean, I think, and especially working with emerging producers, that's a great entree, the short format things. That was a great suggestion. I hadn't thought about that myself. And so Juan, why don't we go ahead and talk about how you work, complete different sides of the country and also different size markets completely and a different model. So go ahead, Juan.
Yeah, and thank you, Amy, and thank you again, Susie, and everyone at the festival. Well, we're in Southern California. We have, like you said, Susie, KCT as a channel, PBS SoCal as a channel, and then Link TV National on satellite. One of the things that we started to do maybe a decade ago was to, recognize how diverse our region was, both in terms of geography and people, and, how much creative energy and how many stories there are out there in our region. And we needed, to figure out how to come up with different ways to be able to capture those things. And we early on, probably almost a decade ago, we had one broadcast show, maybe two, and our need was, how do we connect with our community? How do we tell their stories? And how do we start to attract some funding that could support those things? Because you all know that fundraising for particular projects and documentaries takes years. sometimes. So we needed to create sort of a proof of concept of how to move forward. And we really looked at our digital platforms as a way to start to connect with the makers and start to connect with communities so that we could start to build some sense of what could series look like, what does content that is open and participatory could look like. And, you know, out of this sort of digital initiative, we started, you know, arts, you know, and we started a series called Artbound, and we started Lost LA, and we started that looked at history, and we started, you know, the Migrant Kitchen and a lot of our food content. We started Earth Focus and Tending Nature, would looked at you know, native indigenous communities here in Southern California. And a lot of those efforts were done through short form content and, you know, inviting people to, you know, write editorials and do photo essays and do some sort of multimedia. You know, I look back at those efforts 10 years, 10 years now, and each one of those series is now a franchise that has not only this, you know, robust digital component, but it's also, you know, a multi-part series, right? It could be 4 episodes, it could be 10, 8, 12, depending on the funding that we get. And you know, I wanted to sort of put a sense of the time that it took to build this, because now we have a relationship with funders, we have a relationship with the philanthropic community, with underwriters and sponsors and all that stuff. But it took almost a decade for us to build that. Our relationship with the creative community here is, you know, on independent filmmakers is, how can you bring your talents and your creativity into these franchises that we already have, right? And, you know, early on, for example, when we started the Migrant Kitchen, we wanted to do something that dealt with, you know, the history of, you know, of ethnic food here in Southern California. And, you know, there were young content creators that were doing some really interesting things, and we reached out to them, sat down, and came up with this idea, and started an experiment that now is a national show that is being developed with participant media. So I think that there's you know, there is an experimental part of what we're doing, but I also think that there's a funding constraint and a funding element to all of these, right? Because it is hard to raise money for particular projects, and we're trying to use sort of the economy of scales that come with the resources that a station internally has, so that we can maximize what we give back to the community in terms of content, and find platforms that the independent communities can come in and, you know, and work with us on already created franchises, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, so I think those are really great examples, and I just want to, you know, both of you guys are talking about series as well. So a series that Juan is doing is something that's already created, and then the ability to hire independents to work across the country, basically, but in a different structure. And then Amy, you're talking about like a curation. So a filmmaker already has their film together, but you're providing opportunities where regionally something can be amplified. And so I think those are great things. So I think now, just because of time, because I want to be able to get to Q&A, and also as a group have us all talk, I want Brad, Malkia, sorry, and Chloe to come back. Did it again, Malkia, sorry about that. So after hearing everyone's great points, and even just the beginning of points, because we didn't have time to go through, I had actually a lot more questions for each one of you guys, but as we were talking, we just started trimming down. Just now that you've heard each other's point of view, what are your thoughts on, you know, what strikes you as something that could be actionable, first of all, and then also what do you see as like a issue that we absolutely have to tackle? So Brad, let me go ahead and have you start first. Go ahead, Brad.
Well, a couple of things, I guess. It's such a broad question, but
Yeah, sorry.
when I listen
Answer
to
the way you want. Yeah.
When I listen to Amy and Juan and Chloe all speak, I feel like there are parts of what they're doing that would be of great value to us here in Wisconsin, for instance, and I think independents all over the country. So one is, the work that Firelight is doing to support emerging filmmakers of color outside of the concentrated film regions of New York and LA is so valuable, especially I saw one of the questions someone asked, especially when we have the news industry consolidating, there's a rise of disinformation, and stories from regions need to be told, and they need to be told authentically. So that kind of work, the groundwork is doing, is really important. And so is the opportunity to partner with public media. And I understand, and I'm pretty sober. And when I say by the way, 371 Productions is 9 of us. We're all women except for me. Half of us are filmmakers of color. And we seek out partnerships with everyone on this call. And if we haven't actually partnered with Juan and Amy, don't worry, you'll get calls soon. But the point is, I think one thing that would be great is to see what Amy and Juan are doing, starting to permeate some of the stations that, for a lot of reasons, are still very much in an old model and not working with independents very much. They sometimes, I think, are very much driven by their internal structure or university licensees, and we can get into the weeds around all of that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of stories that need to be told, and I think, if anything, the world witnessing the murder of George Floyd and the protests and the aftermath and the subsequent attention to further murders and violence, we know, and it's amplified how little storytelling is happening from local communities and how important it is. So I think that one thing I would point out is, partnerships are not always about cash money. I know we need money to produce things, but like when we did the gun violence series, Precious Lives, we made use of the studio at WUWM for, we probably logged 250 or 300 hours in that studio, which if you put a price tag on that is pretty significant. So, I guess overall, I'm just saying that I think there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of need regionally to try to forge partnerships with public media, which is the only entity in the game that actually really cares about representation, really cares about elevating voices that aren't heard, really cares about trying to tell stories that might not have commercial viability all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say a few things, Brad. I think that one of the biggest conundrums that we have as a station when we have independents, or when I have independents coming to me, many times they're very big projects that require a lot of funding. And, as you all know, funding is so hard to get, right? So if an independent comes to me and says, look, I need $750,000 for this great idea, it is so hard for me to add that into the bucket of our fundraising team to add into the portfolio of all the other stuff that we have. In some cases it happens. In the majority of the cases, it becomes a very uphill battle. However, there are many times that what I have said is, look, if you have an idea that you want to try out, if you have a concept that maybe we can pull off with the resources, as you're saying, that we internally have, and maybe a little bit of cash, we try it digitally first and see how it goes. Create a model where maybe those digital shorts can become an hour or a half an hour that later on can be used as a calling card to actually go to a funder and say, look, we work on this thing for 8 months. It had these ratings, it had this social presence. Now we have something very concrete to go and fundraise against. And you're also opening a little bit of space for independent projects to be able to enter that sort of ecosystem of your own public television. And some of those examples that we've had have been really, really successful. The Migrant Kitchen was born that way. We just did a series called The Night Shift, which was, you know, looking at labor in LA through in the night shift, right? And there were 6, 7 shorts put together as a 1 hour. Now it's nominated for an Emmy. So I think that there are a lot of opportunities. You just have to be creative, you know, and collaborative in how you come to the middle, right? Because for me, the hardest thing is having a documentary filmmaker come and say, look, I have a great idea. I need tons of money. And I look at that budget, and that budget equates 3 local series that we're doing. So we need to manage both the expectations of both ends so that we can be successful in really lifting up these new stories and lifting up, you know, the type of new work that independents and stations can actually do together.
If I can jump in there,
Yeah.
that communication that you're talking about, so important. One of the best experiences I had in terms of just, you know, triggering light bulbs was a local station sat down at a panel that was hosted by, you know, one of our local filmmaking associations, and really broke down for her station the hows of the programming, you know, the common carriage part, where the slots are, where the thematic cycles happen, broke it all down in a way that was so open and transparent that even in that moment where we're like, wow, where's the hole for us, or where's the money for us? It felt like we're at the beginning of a conversation about, okay, what can we fix? And one of the things I saw was, okay, they're dependent on state legislative funds. We need to advocate for some funds to bring in some, you know, money to actually pay to air work, because they did air work, but they couldn't pay. So those kinds of conversations where it's not spin, and it's also not sort of, I mean, there might be a little finger pointing, but, you know, get past that quickly. And just what is the real reality with an open place on all sides, so that we can start to have a conversation. And I would think independents would probably be willing to participate in that if they knew that then there'd be a follow-up step where it's like, okay, where do we see some opportunities? And as you've heard in this conversation, there are a lot of different models, you know, from just curated, authored content to commissioned for a template series. You know, there's a lot of different ways that it can look, no matter what type of station or size station you are. So that communication, that real honest, this is how it works and how it could work, is what I'd suggest.
Yeah. One of the things
I'll also jump in. Sorry,
yeah,
go ahead,
Chloe.
Susie.
No, you go ahead, Chloe.
I just want to follow up with what Malkia is saying. Almost every breakdown has to do with the lack of communication on the station side and the lack of understanding on the filmmaker side. We feel like we work as an intermediary for that space. We try to, I've sat in on meetings with public television stations and filmmakers at PBS annual meeting. I've set them up. I've sat and said, okay, so if this is not possible, this is a demographic of folks in that space that this filmmaker wants to reach. How is that possible? What are the models you've done before that work? We had one filmmaker, Sofian Khan, who connected during PBS annual meeting with Nashville Public Television. There is an enormous demographic and community of veterans in that space, and they wanted to talk about their film, The Interpreters, looking at how that film can really start a conversation in that community. And you know, they're off to conversations and figuring out how to move forward. But that was a place where we were able to come to a space, to a mutual understanding of how to go forward. I also just want to reiterate this idea about transparency. There are so many levels of re-examinations of every system happening right now. In the last 2 weeks, a young man at TPT, I don't think I'm airing any dates and airing any dirty laundry about this, is very active on social media talking about what his role was like there. Sonia Childress has written an essay called A Reckoning, looking at the entire documentary system and how we can move forward together, how we can be more transparent, how we can be accountable to each other. And that's incredibly important also for the public television system. we are the public as filmmakers. And so it's really important that our voices are heard as well. And also just for stations and filmmakers to expand outside your comfort zone and the boxes that we think that we should occupy. This is an opportunity at this time. And I'm excited to see what comes of it if we're willing to meet the day.
Absolutely. Amy, were you going to say something?
I was just listening. I'm taking notes because
Yeah.
I think that you know, you all are representing the filmmaking community in such a great way. I think that as a public television station content managers, we also have to advocate for filmmakers internally. There's different attitudes in different departments, and depending on people's backgrounds, where, you know, what their past experiences were, or you know, a fear of taking a risk, working with an independent filmmaker where you are providing maybe some editorial guidance, but you're not in control of the editorial. And I know I've come up against that before. So, you know, it really is up to us to advocate for you internally as well. And then I know there's partners that everybody can work with, and you know, more now than ever, PBS stations are interested in partnerships. So that is another place we can come together in working with some of the same partners on projects.
I was going to say, Susie, in response to what Chloe was saying, is that, you know, internally, you know, and really in the ecosystem here of public media in Los Angeles, we've had a really interesting conversation in the last, you know, couple of months, but especially in the last couple of weeks, because there is this assumption we have lived through, you know, saying that it is okay that certain things work the way that they work because that's how it is, right? And, you know, in the last couple of weeks, I think that we have come to the realization that, you know, maybe it is just not okay, right? And maybe we, just like government agencies are being questioned for their structural inequities, journalism, documentary storytelling, and even PBS and public media as a whole have structural issues that need to be looked at, right? When we were covering the protests here in LA, I've had discussions with journalists that have told me, well, I'm just reporting on the facts. And my response to them is, there are 1,000 facts out there. So which ones have we been structurally conditioned to present, right? And then the other thing, editorially, Amy, to your point is...
Well, and can I just interject? Yeah, we all know about the LA newsroom, LA Times newsroom.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And, you know, that's the reckoning that they're having internally over there, you know, and it's the same issue. You know, they need subscriptions. Who is going to pay for the subscriptions? On PBS, we're on the same boat. You know, we need members and we need Masterpiece Theater, right? To pay for those membership dues and stuff like that. And that's structurally an issue that we need to look into. But the other thing that I was going to say is that there's so many times that we have done content here that I'm always questioning the level of political activism that content may potentially have. And when I'm looking at it now, I am trying to identify, is this on the side of truth? If somebody saw this 20 years from now, would it be a partisan piece of media, or would it be truth? You know, and those are the beautiful conversations that we're having, and we're having with the community, you know, and I'm having with all the filmmakers and producers internally and externally that are currently working for us or with us.
Yeah, one thing I just wanted to quickly say, and we got to get, unfortunately, or not unfortunately, but looking at the time, we need to, and the questions that we have, we need to get to the Q&A. But I would say, you know, one thing that the stations really have, and PBS in general, nationally has issues with, is being able to pivot. So when these events are happening, there's nothing new or current, and there's no communication, I feel, with the indie community to know, oh, I know that Malkia is working on something. Let me give her a call and see where is she with this, and let's see if we could put money into this, get it wrapped up. Or, you know, instead we go to our library of established filmmakers that have been we've already aired them several times, and you know those are great too. But I always feel like we need to contextualize the moment. Why are we airing? You know, we just aired Black Panthers, Chloe, as you know, and nationally it aired, but on New York, we pulled our whole lineup up that night, put it on, and we interviewed Stanley Nelson that day on our public affairs show, which was great. But we also had him produce a quick spot to explain, you know, just a tiny little contextualization of like, they changed their lineup because this is important and we need to air this. But that's such a tiny little thing. Like, I would have loved for him to be able to make a small, you know, even a 10-minute piece for us that could say, here's why we air it now, or be able to contact a local filmmaker who was out on the streets or had been documenting things, and we could help by editing and putting that stuff in there. And that's what we can't, I won't say we can't, but what COVID-19 has really showed is that stations definitely, when forced to pivot, have had to, or they realize we can't pivot, and that's a problem. Radio stations, this has been no problem for them. You know, the technology was the only issues they really had, you know, having reporters in their closets with pillows, you know, doing this so that the audio sounded good was really their only issue. We're talking lights, camera, you know, we're talking about a lot of things, a lot of equipment that we've had to streamline that the indies have had to deal with. They could have helped readily, and I know that they can. Did anyone have anything to say before I start getting to questions?
I have lots to say, but
I know.
As do I.
I know.
Yeah, we should get to the questions. There's a lot
Let me get
of
to some questions. There's a lot, and I'm trying to comb through real quick. So, and some of them are comments, so I'll just go through. One of the first questions from Sarah came, do you see a connection between dwindling local media, misinformation, and conservatism in rural areas? So Amy Schumacher, you probably should answer this one since you're in,
absolutely.
I think, the most.
Yeah, absolutely. We have our local newspapers, which are just, you know, having a terrible time of keeping up with the needs of the community. And we're actually looking at becoming a more news-focused organization. But I can tell you that some of the wealthiest people in the country have homes on our coast, and 2 miles east are some of the probably most some of the poorest communities in the country. And we definitely we're a red state, so we definitely have a challenge. And no matter how we're reporting, sometimes we say, I think we're doing a good job because both sides of the issue are upset with us.
Right.
And that just happened. And we said, hey, we must have really done a good job with this because everybody doesn't think we did our job correctly, but we were there and we reported. So I do think that we need that kind of support, and people who work in rural settings and really have access to communities that we need to hear from. Those are the folks that we want to work with. And we were able, just to your point, to tap into a couple freelance photojournalists for our news coverage that are definitely have more access to the communities that we were reporting on, which was a really great thing. I'd like to build on that.
Can I briefly just add to, I think in addition to reporting it, this is why regional filmmaking is so important. And 2 quick examples. I mean, I happen to have the great honor to be a Firelight mentor to a young man named Tim Tsai, who made a film called Seadrift, which is about the Vietnamese community in Seadrift, Texas, and tension that has led to violence. And even though the story took place in the past, it's context that I'm guessing most of the country, and certainly even in that region, people don't know. And there are just millions of stories like that that need to be part of the retelling of history that contextualizes our presence too. I mean, that's part of the, you know, to use a fancy term, the reification of the present, because the lenses now that are being able to be applied, Black lenses, brown lenses, can help us to see that we have not really understood where we came from.
So one of the comments that came in from PBS Utah, hi Lisa from PBS Utah, saying that a lot of the smaller PBS stations are interested in stories only about their locale, which is very true, or their state or the city. Like if you have a film that's about Texas, the whole state of Texas wants it. You just need to get to the right programmer in Texas and they'll help circulate that around. And certainly when I worked in San Francisco, Juan and I would exchange content or documentaries or inform each other about things all the time because we wanted that California connection there. I should also mention, someone asked, do a lot of stations or do other stations have series that Amy was kind of talking about regional curated series? And yes, there are some stations that have those kind of things, or they have that kind of motive. So PBS Utah doesn't necessarily have a series, but they are anything about the West, they're looking for that. And a lot of the Western states are doing that. San Francisco has a series called Truly California. And Juan, you were gonna say, what were you gonna say?
Well, I mean, I was going to say that I'm very interested in anything related to the West because, you know, we're sort of a patchwork of, we're a regional patchwork, right? And Lisa, if you're interested in having a conversation, I would love to. And the other thing that I was going to add to this idea, that for some reason there is this concept on PBS that local is just local. And when you really look at a lot of the reality-based documentary series on cable, they're actually all local, the majority of them, right? They're about fishermen in Alaska or, you know, alligator, whatever. I mean, they're not that great, but they are all local stories. When you look at it, it's just how you frame that local story that could potentially have a national audience. And that's another thing that we always try to do with the conversations with independent and local filmmakers is how can we make this story interesting for somebody in, you know, in Louisiana, in Florida, in New York.
But even if not,
I just want to jump in really quickly that responding to that question, that often local does not necessarily mean diverse. And I want it to be like that, the whole conversation that we've been having about rural stories, which are often not diverse when they're highlighted. And it's really important that we look at the whole, not only socioeconomic, not only political, where are we all coming from? Because we all make up those communities as well. And putting importance in an equal space as well.
I just want
Absolutely.
to things, yes, that even if the agree with all that's been said, even if the local isn't geared towards how can we get it on a national platform, it can be just as rich and invaluable. And I think filmmakers, as well as stations, some stations, because where some want to only focus local, there are some stations who think local means subpar. And there's some film do as well, and who see work local as just a stepping stone to something else. That's an attitude we need to shift. And on the other hand, I think some things like seeing partnerships with independents is just a way to create a fee-for-service kind of pipeline, like that has to end as well. So, you know, I think there's some attitude shifts on all sides. I want to throw in here for whoever's listening who knows the answer, like what happened to links? Like what happened to these national initiatives that encourage these conversations and these partnerships where it might not be cash that's exchanged, but there's the good name, the platform, the resources, the finishing services, those kinds of things at a systemic level that can help spur this.
Yeah, I'll say that I know that links ended in part because stations just didn't have staff. You know, the stations weren't partnering. It wasn't for lack of interest from producers. The producing community definitely loved links, but I think that was biggest part. And at the time that I was at TBS, I hadn't been at a station in a while. Now that I'm at a station, I completely understand why some stations are just off the table. They're completely union shop. They cannot work with independents, or they're struggling just to even pay the people that they have, the thought of giving in kind. There's a lot of things, but I think, you know, ITVS has evolved it, and there's still a station and a producer can still apply. And I can't remember what that information is off the top of my head, but I will find it and I will share it with AFI so that they can share that with other people, because I know that there's things. But speaking of partnerships, a couple of questions have come in that said, what do you guys mean by partnerships? And Malkia, you're kind of addressing that in, you know, if you mean a partnership is I pay this, me, an independent pays the station to help me, that doesn't seem like a partnership, but maybe, you know, maybe we talk about that. But to the station folks, that's what some of the audience wants to know. Like, what do stations talk about? What do they mean by partnership? What do you guys mean by that?
I can go first. You know, I've been at my current station, which is about a medium-sized market, for 2.5 years. And I don't have the relationship with the independent community that I had at my last station in South Carolina, where I worked really hard to build a relationship with independents and try to help grow the community, which was very limited. So, you know, I personally, as a content manager, I want to get to know who the independents are working in the area, which I, you know, will speak to people personally. I ask our film festival, local film festival managers to think about us when they see content that might be appropriate. I have yet to been invited to a local panel, but that might be something that I can advocate for, just to get to know people. When I was talking about partnerships, you know, I think about if you work with your local humanities council or arts council, you know, that's a group that we are likely to partner with too. So partnerships could be more than just between the filmmaker and the station, but maybe pulling in some potential funding organizations or organizations that will elevate the work that we could do together. And I imagine it's a little different at every station. So one may have it differently.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it really, you know, partnership, you know, the word partnership itself can take a lot of different colors, but you know, we do co-production with small independent companies like 371. We do creative, you know, hirings of independent producers and independent directors. We co-develop content. We help with finishing funds to bring films to our air and to bring films into, you know, into presentation to PBS and PBS Plus. I mean, there's so many different varieties of ways that we can, you know, look at what partnerships and collaborations are all about. It's, you know, a just straight up hire that would be a creative energy brought into a series that we already have, or it can be just developing a small series. You know, anyway, I mean, it can take so many different colors.
Thank you. Thanks, you guys. I think there's, let me get to, sorry, one more, but we have to be so quick. We only have 2 minutes, you guys. Do local stations ever help producers market proposals for short content to other stations? So in other words, helping with distribution?
I take that. Yes. I mean, if we were working with a local filmmaker on something that to Brad's point, it might be a really local story, but it's going to be important to other communities, we would definitely support getting that, helping them get it out there, either through a distributor. And I want to say that the NETA, APT, and PBS Plus, while they are not necessarily, they're really just distribution platforms, but stations trust the content that comes from them. So working with one of them is helpful. And it, you know, if NETA takes a short film, which I know they do take short work, you know, you have to do the work to help get the word out to other stations, but stations are more likely to carry something if they know it's already been kind of vetted at that level. And the fact that a station has aired it is really great if it's already aired on the station. And I just also wanted to say that all the Florida stations are very well connected as well. So if anyone out there is working somewhere else in Florida, we're very much in a strong partnership. So reach out to me and I can help.
I'm getting the signal that we need to wrap it up, but I think this is a good sign that we have way more questions than we have time. And for those that ask questions, a lot of them, there's definite answers that we can provide. So maybe AFI can send us, the panelists, all the questions, and then we can address them and somehow share them again. But I think, the biggest things I'm hearing is that transparency is an issue and that we need to communicate more, that the system, we all know, is very difficult to navigate when you're just walking in. But even as you heard from, people who've been in the business for a while, it's such a huge web and opportunities are there. But consider us helpers. We will definitely, communicate with you. And there's tons of ways to distribute your film, your short content, and stations need the content either on their online, radio, TV. I mean, there's no shortage. It's a huge beast that's always hungry. So it's just, we need to, hear about them.